when restraint becomes the advantage. Restraint functions as a visible limit. A person reduces output, narrows access, and declines to feed the flow of signals that others expect. This does not read as emptiness in most group settings. It reads as capacity withheld. The reduced availability creates a quiet separation between their internal state and external demands. That distance is not explained or defended, and it does not invite inquiry. It forces others to adjust their behavior without being asked. The mechanics are simple. When one person withholds their reactions, the group must estimate where attention, tolerance, and patience actually sit. The absence of immediate response increases uncertainty around that person. People do not move toward what is certain to reject them, nor do they assume they can pull resources from someone who does not advertise need. The lack of eager signals gets read as selectivity by default. It does not matter whether the restraint is deliberate or habitual. The effect is the same on observers who have to make decisions in limited time. Restraint shifts timing in the room. It slows the cycle between offer and response, and the slower tempo becomes the operating pace around that person. Others wait. Others edit. Others make preemptive adjustments to avoid friction. The restrained person does not have to enforce anything with words, because the enforcement is coded into their pattern of not making themselves cheaply available. The core move is omission, and it is steady. There are no visible spikes, no performed refusals, no open threats. Incentives evolve around this silence. People who want access front-load their concessions. They tighten their asks. They remove casual pressure and present fewer variables. The restrained person becomes the one who does not waste time, so the people who approach do not bring waste. That reputation consolidates without any explicit claim. Over time, others internalize a rule. Outcomes involving this person require more preparation and produce clearer commitments. This pattern forms because social systems allocate deference to agents who do not show need. In most contexts, those who chase attention are marked as service providers, not as deciders. Those who speak sparingly protect their error rate by not exposing half-formed positions to attack. They avoid contradicting themselves in public because there is less said to contradict. A consistent low-signal posture reduces the number of hooks others can pull on. It limits gossip, limits rumor, and limits leverage against them. Restraint also redirects projection. Observers fill in the gaps with their own assumptions, which tend to favor competence when there is no counter-evidence. It is easier to ascribe calm judgment to the quiet actor than to blame them for outcomes that were never publicly discussed. If their reputation was even slightly positive at the start, the silence reinforces it. If their reputation was ambiguous, the silence stabilizes ambiguity into caution from others. The restrained person becomes the baseline that others learn not to test for sport. The internal experience of restraint often feels justified while it is happening. The person practicing it feels they are avoiding low-value conflict, protecting attention, and conserving energy. They do not feel passive. They feel selective. When they decline fast responses, it reads to them as discipline, not delay. When they leave messages unanswered, it reads to them as filtration, not neglect. The calm they present is not primarily about emotion. It is a governance of access that looks like emotional control from the outside. The justification is reinforced by the outcomes it produces. People who repeatedly get adjusted by this restraint reduce unnecessary pushes in the future. Offers arrive with better terms because the requesters do not want to be put on hold. The restrained person sees the upgraded behavior and reads it as proof that their limits are correct. They believe they are avoiding risk rather than applying pressure. They see the improved fit of what reaches them and assume it is intrinsic, not reactive. There is also a strong misread from the inside. The restrained person often interprets silence as neutral when it is a strong signal. Their lack of response is treated by others as a form of decision. People withdraw, change course, or escalate their own effort to fill the gap. The restrained person thinks they have not acted. The observers experience the silence as a clear action. This discrepancy allows the restrained person to claim objectivity while the group reorganizes around their non-commitment. This misread extends to respect. The restrained person assumes softer treatment is respect for their time or mind. In many cases, it is a survival adaptation. People stop imposing because they believe there is a cost. They become cautious because the cost of misreading is higher near someone who does not meet them halfway. The restrained person receives deference that feels earned. Often it is not about merit, but about predicted resistance. Those predictions harden into habit. On the other end, unrestrained actors interpret quiet as an opening. They push, fill pauses, and dilute their value by exposing it on demand. They then meet delayed or minimal replies and assume they are still in control because they are talking. They do not register that the talk is proof of supply, not of leverage. They reveal constraints that could have remained unknown, and they make their position predictable under pressure. They overplay, and they lose position. They speak too much and get ignored. Their need shows, and status drains away. Observers also misread from within the pattern. They confuse restraint with disinterest and try to provoke engagement. They often fail, and that failure marks them as noisy rather than bold. They then back off, but the damage to their image remains. They learn they are not granted the same access, and others learn the same about them. The restrained person does not fight for this reallocation. It happens around them as a side effect of ordinary interaction. When restraint is consistent, it produces an impression of control over tempo, access, and attention. This impression hardens because people would rather avoid uncertain outcomes than push into a wall. They self-select out before they generate conflict. This reduces visible incidents and increases the appearance of consensus around the restrained person. Because conflict is reduced, the restrained person appears reasonable without having to demonstrate flexibility. The absence of clear friction is treated as smooth alignment. Consistency also builds a recognizable pattern that others can anticipate. The restrained person gives nothing away early. They listen or remain quiet. When they do speak, it is usually late and limited. The group assigns weight to that move because it is rare. Even when the content is simple, the timing makes it decisive. The person has learned that infrequent output gets amplified by everyone else's need for a clear line. This shape of influence is not felt as coercion by the person who uses it. It is felt as mood management, scheduling, or personal boundaries. They do not experience it as a strategy, even when it is one. Because they do not voice demands, they convince themselves they are not making demands. They do not detect the way scarcity of reaction functions as leverage in systems where attention and access are the currency of every exchange. To them, restraint feels like survival and standards. To others, it is a wall they cannot move. When outsiders attempt to copy restraint without the underlying position, the pattern fails. If they withhold too early without any baseline of value, they get categorized as absent rather than selective. People stop asking, not out of respect, but because there is no expected return. The silence is interpreted as not having anything to offer, not as having the discretion to choose. Copying the behavior without the context exposes the difference between real and posed limits. The person for whom restraint becomes an advantage usually has at least one resource that makes the refusal credible: competence, network, time, or alternatives. These enable the restraint to hold without collapse under social penalties. Because they can walk away, they do not have to show flexibility to maintain relationships. The environment senses this and puts a higher price on their attention and agreement. Over time, they pay fewer social costs to maintain boundaries, because those boundaries are now part of how others define them. The environment co-authors the pattern. Colleagues, friends, and competitors retain a memory of when restraint produced an advantage for them as well. When dealing with this person, they get clarity and fewer surprises. They prefer that in contexts where visibility is already low. So they adapt to preserve access to someone who reduces risk by not overextending. This makes the restrained person's pattern more entrenched, since it is now reinforced by external rewards. Signals inside the pattern are misread because they are asymmetric. The restrained person receives deference and reads it as deserved. The people around them alter behavior and read it as prudent. The targets of restraint feel pressure and read it as atmosphere. No one labels the force directly because it arrives as the absence of noise. It does not announce itself, so it never needs to be defended. Because it is not framed as control, it is rarely challenged. Challenges require a claim to push against, and restraint avoids claims. The most common response is to test once, fail to move anything meaningful, and then adjust to the new baseline. This is efficient for the group and advantageous for the restrained person. It reduces negotiation cycles and embeds their preferences in routine. They are not pushed to justify selections. Others limit their own options in advance of any decision. From within the pattern, the restrained person believes they are being reasonable, fair, and calm. They point to their lack of visible conflict as evidence. They point to good outcomes as proof that the pattern is sound. They do not see the people who never approach them. They do not count the opportunities that evaporate because the cost of their engagement was perceived as too high. The benefits they do see reinforce their stance and make any change unlikely. The unrestrained person believes they are the active one. They center their own speech and energy as indicators of agency. They accumulate public presence and assume it translates to influence. They do not notice the informal filters forming around them. They get invited to visible roles that require exposure, not to quiet rooms where decisions lock in. The mismatch between visibility and relevance grows slowly, without a public incident to mark the shift. By the time the distinctions are clear, they are already embedded. The restrained person has become the reference. Others spend their energy interpreting small cues from them, not from the loud presence in the room. The pattern is self-sustaining because it requires little effort from its beneficiary. It runs on the adjustments of everyone else. It does not announce itself. It does not expose intent, and it does not ask for permission. Once the pattern is set, observers reinterpret the restrained person as the stable point. They assume consistency where there is only omission. They call it discipline because it keeps them from wasting time and face. People who prefer predictable risk begin to prioritize the restrained person, not because of charm or warmth, but because of the reduction of noise they impose on the process. Access becomes a resource others protect on their behalf. The restrained person does not make requests. They receive quiet maintenance from people who want to keep the path to them open. The allocation of respect follows a simple line. The person who does not need the meeting receives more deference from those who do. Requests to them get shorter, more specific, and better timed. People who seek their involvement remove drama because they know drama gets nothing. The restrained person's minimal response is treated as a finite resource. Everyone behaves as if it should not be spent on small things. The distribution of attention recalibrates without announcement. Because the restrained person has made scarcity the normal condition, their presence in any discussion is immediately weighted. Even when they contribute little, their contributions are treated as decisive. People shape proposals to anticipate their likely opinion, then declare victory when it matches. This reduces the variability of outcomes at the cost of exploration. The restrained person acquires a reputation for clear outcomes that they did not need to drive. The room does the work of fitting itself to them. The talker keeps talking, but the channel of real decisions narrows away from them. Their arguments get recorded and acknowledged in formal spaces. The contact points that matter move to quiet exchanges with the restrained person. Invitations to secondary meetings go out without public schedules. The talker sees activity and believes participation equals influence. The actual transfer of authority has already shifted. The talker stops getting real decisions. Loudness converts into a service. They prepare the ground, frame the public case, and absorb the time that others do not want to spend. They are asked to present, to champion, to inform. They are not asked to choose. The choices arrive elsewhere. When outcomes are announced, the explanations borrow the talker's language without giving them the power they thought the language granted. The talker becomes necessary and safe to ignore at the same time. From the outside, this looks polite. There are no confrontations that would force a face-saving reversal. Nothing obvious changes, yet everything changes. The restrained person's requests, when they finally make them, are interpreted as final. Resistance collapses before it forms, because the people who would mount it have already edited themselves out. The restrained person speaks less and wins more because the contest never starts. Partners and rivals adapt their model of the restrained person. They stop measuring them by the volume of contributions and start measuring them by the resistance their silence produces. They trim asks from the start, accept longer delays, and provide more complete packages. Each concession confirms the prior expectation of necessary concessions. The restrained person appears to be reasonable because what reaches them has already been made easy to accept. The impression is self-confirming. Inside teams, quiet authority becomes the default. People begin to manage each other by invoking the restrained person's likely stance, often without checking. This saves them from the cost of surprise. It also protects the restrained person from overextension, since they do not need to be present to shape behavior. Their name becomes a proxy for constraint. Work lines up around that name as if it were a boundary. Nobody wants to test beyond it. Hiring, invitations, and alliances adjust. The restrained person is selected for roles that control timing, access, and final calls. The talker is placed where visibility and energy are demanded on demand. Both think they are being matched to their strengths. Only one gets to define what strength counts. Nothing in the surface narrative contradicts this. It is efficient for the system, even if it is quietly punitive for the one who spends themselves for attention. The restrained person's silence also creates a shield of plausible deniability. When outcomes are poor, they can point to their lack of direct push. When outcomes are good, they are credited for setting standards that directed others to better choices. Their social risk is lower at both ends. They gain upside without public attachment to downside. People maintain this structure because it simplifies their own accountability within the hierarchy of blame. The same pattern erodes the talker's reputation, even as they remain visible. They are linked to every discussion and to the noise that surrounds it. They acquire the image of someone who can be used to soften the ground, justify a move, or drain a problem of urgency, but not of someone who decides where the system goes next. They become a tool for consensus, not a source of consequence. Their sense of agency does not match the system's allocation of power. Their reach shrinks behind closed doors. This is not personal in any meaningful sense. It is structural. The system rewards the signal that reduces coordination costs and punishes the signal that adds to them. The restrained person lowers the coordination cost by withholding and by forcing early convergence around them. The talker increases it by expanding options in public to show energy or control. The outcome is not argued. It is observed and repeated until it is habit. The habit is then explained after the fact as if it was intentional design. Competitors learn quickly where to apply pressure. Pressure on the talker yields reaction and exhausts them. Pressure on the restrained person yields little and risks exclusion. So most pressure is redirected, and the restrained person continues to appear calm and central. Even when a direct challenge is attempted, it dies in the gap between effort and response, since there is no response to amplify it. The challenger looks reckless. The restrained person looks unaffected. The silent reallocation hardens further. Sponsors and gatekeepers make early calls based on who is easy to manage. The restrained person requires fewer meetings, fewer explanations, and fewer revisions. Gatekeepers prefer this because it protects their own standing. They pass opportunity through that channel. The talker receives recognition, but no keys. The proof is in how many decisions require their presence to proceed. That number drops over time with no announcement. People recalibrate their private language. They begin to say, ask them, when deadlines, budgets, or standards are in question, and they are referring to the restrained person. They begin to say, loop them, when publicity or buy-in are in question, and they are referring to the talker. The split is clean and quiet. The restrained person sets frames without visible framing. The talker delivers alignment without authoring the shape. This becomes the natural order inside the group. Even signals of warmth or friendliness do not change the structure. People may like the talker and still exclude them from the actual choice. They may feel indifferent to the restrained person and still defer to them when weight is needed. Emotion does not move the allocation once the mechanism has set. It is not an interpersonal story. It is an efficiency story that writes itself through repeated interactions until nobody remembers any other way of working. The reallocation keeps compounding. New entrants take cues from who is interrupted and who is not. They copy the formats that get results, not the performances that get applause. They learn to save their best work for the restrained person's rare windows. They stop trying to impress the talker because it changes nothing. The result is a network of people who keep adjusting in one direction without anyone having to instruct them to. It is automatic. The restrained person, for their part, grows less and less aware of the active role they play. Their passivity is read as fairness, and they accept that reading. They are not pushed to explain their silence, and so they do not examine it. The system protects them from feedback with the same silence that enhances their authority. They are carried by the structures their pattern created and reinforced. Their advantage no longer looks like an advantage to them. It looks like ordinary reality. They are present, but not consulted. Loss for the talker becomes mundane. Meetings end without commitments to them. Messages receive acknowledgement without movement. Invitations come with tasks, not choices. The difference between their schedule and their leverage becomes obvious from the outside. Inside, the mismatch feels normal because it builds in small increments. It is the default by the time it can be named. As this continues, the restrained person's minimal actions cause maximal adjustment. A brief delay is enough to pause entire lines of work. A single sentence becomes a veto that nobody calls a veto. A short nod accelerates a plan that has already been shaped to avoid friction. People do not ask for detailed reasons. They do not need them. They have already invested in reading the few available signals, and they will not abandon that investment. The absence of confrontation keeps reputations intact on the surface. The talker is thanked. The restrained person is described as solid. Nothing moves that would trigger an overt challenge or a demand for justification. The actual flow of influence remains invisible in documentation and visible to anyone watching the way people behave when time is short. The unseen rules are stronger than any stated rule. Because the pattern is efficient for the group, any reversal is costly. Even if the restrained person becomes less available, people will still wait because waiting is paid off before. Even if the talker becomes more disciplined, the group will still root around them because that rooting reduces risk. The structure prefers continuity over experiment with no guarantee of gain. Everyone protects their own status by keeping to the learned path. The system defends the advantage it has already built. None of this requires malice or intention. It is the result of simple preferences repeated many times. Prefer calm signals, prefer less overhead, prefer predictable outcomes. Restraint satisfies these preferences more reliably than effortful expression. So the one who embodies it becomes the one the system uses to stabilize itself. The cost of that stabilization is borne by the person who cannot stop broadcasting their need to matter. By the time the distribution of authority is obvious, it is already treated as fixed. The restrained person benefits from a reservoir of deference that refills itself. The talker keeps busy while their circle of real influence closes to a narrow line. The routine erases any path back to balance. The outcome stops surprising anyone who has been paying attention. Nothing is said, and the pattern holds.